Well, hello and welcome to another Monday night Q&A. I'm joined tonight by my colleague Lee Hancock from the Area Engineers team. Good evening, Lee.
Good evening, Sam. Are you well?
Yeah, I'm good. And yourself?
Yeah, not bad. Thank you very much.
Okay. As it's your first night presenting on Monday night, do you want to tell the viewers a little bit about your background, what you do for the NIC and what you've been doing recently?
Yeah, certainly. I'm one of the North East area engineers. There's three of us that cover the North East, Chris Thomas, Peter Williams and myself. My area starts round about the South Durham area and goes all the way up to Gateshead, Newcastle, Northumberland, right the way up to the Scottish borders. So I've got a large area. Predominantly I assess mainly approved contractors. There are a few domestic installers in there. I also carry out ECA assessments as well. Also incorporating applicants when they want to come on board, so we guide them through the process. Sometimes we do pre-assessments with these guys just to make them feel a little bit more at ease over, what's due to come in the following assessment. That's pretty much it, really.
Yep, and I can remember you've helped us out on the helpline from time to time as well, which has always been very much appreciated. And
I've now a few days down at Warwick House.
I remember you loved it. You wanted more. You wanted to stay on and on. So that was really good.
Who knows? One day.
So we'll make a start. The question of the week this week, hopefully people have had a chance to have a look at it, was can I install a single phase circuit and a three-phase circuit in the same multi-core cable? So what's your initial thoughts about that, Lee?
Well, there isn't really a problem with this. If we look at 521.1 for guidance, one of the main things we need to consider is the highest voltage present within the cable and ensuring that the cable, the insulation will withstand the highest voltage. One of the situations where you might come across this, I've found, is on a three-phase motor star delta, where the motor might incorporate a centrifugal switch, which the control circuit is of a much lower voltage, but because there's 400 volts present within the cable, we've got to ensure that those cores on the control side can also handle the highest voltage present at 400 volts.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's as you say, there's nothing to say that you can't do it, and in fact, if we have a quick look, there's a regulation that effectively spells it out that you clearly can. So if we look at regulation 521.7, hate to start spouting regs, but yeah, there's one that specifically says 2 or more circuits are allowed in the same cable, provided the requirements of section 528 are met. And section 528 is all about proximity with electrical services with other services, and it also goes into the requirements about different voltage levels, as you said, bands 1 and 2, and what we need to consider when we mix that. But effectively, when we've got single phase and three phase standard circuits, they'd both be considered band 2, so there'd be no issues in having two band 2 voltage levels in the same multi-core cable. But as you say, you've got to ensure that they can withstand that highest voltage, which would be considerably, we'd consider 400 volts for the three phase. Just following on from that, what about bands 1 and bands 2? Where can we find information about bands 1 and band 2, Lee?
Yeah, certainly. We can have a look at definitions, and that's going to give us an indication over the magnitude of the voltages, if you like. But if you want to just touch base on the voltages, Sam, if we look at extra low voltage, AC 50 volts up to 120 volts ripple free, DC, that would be considered as extra low voltage, and then anything beyond that would be low voltage. So we're talking about 1000 volts AC to 1500 volts ripple free, DC. Those are the sort of bands that we're looking at, and where we might find these, if we look at extra low voltage, this could be control circuits, alarm systems, communication systems, And then the low voltage, which would normally apply to your general domestic and the majority of commercial and industrial installations. They were the most commonly found.
Yeah, and so that's when we need to be considerate of the voltages around. And as you mentioned at the beginning, if we're going to run them in the same multi-core cable and we've got mixed bands, then we need to make sure that all bands have got insulation rated to the highest voltage. But yeah, if you look in definitions at voltages, that's when you'll find the information around bands 1 and bands 2. And then the last follow-up question was about, can I, if I combine two core SWA cables to create a single 4-wire 3-phase system? So this is kind of going the other way round. Now, rather than putting 2 circuits into a single multi-core cable, the question was, could I use 2 separate multi-core cables for a single circuit? And this one is a no. Again, there's a regulation which takes us through this, and it talks about we have to ensure that each part of a circuit should be arranged so that the conductors are not distributed over different multi-core cables. And where I've got multi-core cables that I might run in parallel, each cable has to contain 1 conductor of each line. So I couldn't combine 2 core SWAs to have, for example, 2 lines in one and a line and neutral in the other. I'm not allowed to do that. So that's a no, and that's in 521.8.1.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct, Sam. And it's worth also bearing in mind when we've got 2 cables in parallel, so we might have 3 phases and a neutral in one and 3 phases and a neutral in the other. These need to be of identical length as well. They need to take the same route and be identical length. Else what we're going to find is if one's got an increased length over the other one cable's going to carry more load than the other. This could create thermal issues, and it may be that the cable's technically undersized.
Yeah, because as soon as we start changing the length, we're going to affect the resistance, and then, like you say, as soon as you affect the resistance, you're going to affect the current carrying capacity. So that was a good series that ran from some of those. We'll start to have a look now if we've got some questions coming through from the chat room. So we'll just trawl to the back of those. Insulation tape or heat shrink to identify phase colours. So that's kind of an open question, but I think they're saying is, can we use insulation tape or heat shrink to identify phase colours? The concern would be the durability. So if we go to some of our favourite regs which talk about good workmanship and proper materials, then we should really be using proper cable idents or cable markers to do that. Insulation tape, I'd always be concerned about its durability. It's not designed for that purpose, and it's going to unstick and unravel, and then you've lost your indication. Yeah. So no, I think our strong recommendation would be there always that we're using proper materials. Let's have a look at what else we've got in the chat room. If works need to be done as a result of an EICR, is it acceptable to use some of the test results from the EICR to help to complete an EIC? It does qualify it with same person doing the testing, but I think it's not just whether it's the same person or not. We'd also be thinking about the timing. So it does say if work needs to be done as a result of an EICR, is it acceptable to use some of the test results from the EICR to help complete an EIC? Same person doing EICR and remedial work. But what are your thoughts on that, Lee?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, some of the values may not change. For instance, ZE, if we've gone in one day and completed an EICR and we're going back the next day, it's highly unlikely it's going to change. But it also depends on the magnitude of work that we're doing. So, for instance, if one of the remedial actions would be to change a consumer unit, although we may well have verified polarity R1 and R2 and insulation resistance at the outset, by changing the consumer unit, we could actually affect these. So this comes under initial verification. The minute we start replacing consumer units, using that as an example, or modifying circuits, we're going out of the remit of EICR methods of testing back into initial verification. And it's important that before we leave the site, that we have actually verified that the installation is fit for service and continued use. Because at the end of the day, Sam, we're all human. It doesn't matter what experience we've got, we all make small errors. And, a lot of guys out there employ apprentices and they trust these guys because they've been there for a while. And maybe, sometimes they haven't got the experience and, they let loose to do something and it might look good. But when we do the initial testing, if you like, it might open up a small scenario where something might need a small degree of action to put it right. Yeah. So, maybe something that we've caused without realising.
Yeah, I think that's very true, isn't it? You've got to consider all the changes that you've made. What characteristics could they have affected, and then you've got to re-verify that you haven't actually adversely affected those. So yeah, that's one thing. I think the timing as well. I'd be concerned if there was a big time period between the EICR and the EIC. You might have to consider doing everything just to ensure that nothing else adverse had happened. But yeah, you do really, even if it's an immediate repair, because quite often you might get that contract that says, I want you to do a full EICR, but I want you to do the remedial work as you progress. That's acceptable, and it's often done for expedience. So you'll be producing the right certification or documentation for the remedial work. And in that instance, then you've got to think, okay, well, now I've done that, what could I have affected? What am I going to have to repeat test-wise to make sure that I haven't adversely affected it? So there are some things that you could repeat, but you would need to think about the time period, and you'd also think about the remedial work that you've done. What could it possibly have affected that I might want to re-verify? So, but a fair question. Let's have a look. I think we've then got people repeating or just joining in when we were talking about our multi-core cables, and very good. Somebody saying that they love regs. I'm not sure we'd sort of push ourselves too much to spout regs. Maybe 1 week we'll just give regulation answers. We'll go back to old school. But we do try and show the odd ones, because we've listened to the feedback that people wanted to have some regs so that they could refer to. So the question of the week scenarios, we try and give you the information so that you can go back in your own time, re-watch these and look up the regs at the same time. So yeah, we don't really want to bombard you with regs this late on a Monday night. Okay. I've just wired a shepherd's hut again. Another one of these, Staycation UK is getting shepherd's huts and hot tubs everywhere. So I've just wired a shepherd's hut with a distribution board for lighting and power, with a 32 amp external socket for the customer to plug into on site. What certificate do I need to issue for the shepherd's hut? So it would be a full installation certificate. I don't believe it's going to be transportable, if it's a hut. But yeah, it would be a full installation certificate, not domestic, because we wouldn't see that as a domestic installation, although installation wise, in terms of types of circuits and compatibility, it'd be a very domestic style installation. But if it's strictly not, if it's a commercial venture, then it needs to be looked on in that respect, in that it is a non-domestic installation. What would be your thoughts on that if someone presented a domestic installation certificate, Lee?
I was certainly queried, because when we think about domestics, we're thinking about dwellings, aren't we, Sam? where people reside for most of the time. These are the shepherd's huts. They're just rentable units where somebody might want to stay overnight or for a weekend. And there's also certain elements of the year where they may not well be in use.
Yeah.
They may be isolated. So if I was presented with a domestic certificate on a periodic assessment visit, I would certainly question the QS as to whether this is the right documentation to supply for that that type of installation.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think in the thoughts, it's not seen as a domestic. It would be seen as something like a rented chalet, almost in the same realms as a hotel room, and we certainly wouldn't accept a domestic installation certificate for that. Let's have a look. Is 6mm earth acceptable for gas water main bonds? Again, a very common question, because 6mm was traditionally used some time ago. So there are still an awful lot of installations with 6mm gas and water bonds currently. I think if we look at it in two parts, if you're looking at it for a new installation, then if it's a TT earthing arrangement or a TNS earthing arrangement, then 6mm bonds are the minimum size. So it would fall down if it were a TNCS or PME installation new, where the minimum bonds would be 10mm. So if we're talking about a new installation, 6mm could be acceptable on TT or TNS, but not on TNCS. If we're talking about an existing installation, where perhaps the bonding was done to previous version, the advice that we give through our good friend Best Practice Guide 4 is that, providing it is 6mm and it's not showing any signs of thermal damage, and you can actually perhaps even measure to see if there are any circulating currents in the bonding conductors. If it's not showing any signs of thermal damage, then we don't believe that that's a danger to the installation or the users of the installation. So it's something that we'd suggest you record, because you're going to record bonding sizes, but it doesn't need to be given a classification code. You agree with that, Lee?
Yeah, Chapter 54 is going to give us some guidance on that. And if we are working on an installation where it was installed to a previous edition of the regulations, and for instance if it was TNCS, we could in some circumstances apply the adiabatic equation to see how it calculates, how it works out, to see whether these are acceptable for continued use.
Well, not. I'll have to disagree with you there. Not on a bonding conductor. So we could use the adiabatic on for sizing CPCs, but not for bonding. So bonding needs to be sized, doesn't it, based on either table 54.8 if we're in TNCS land, or we size it based on the size of the required incoming earth for TT and TNS. Let's have a look what else we've got in there. What certificate would be needed for installation? Oh, so beach hut, but I think that's much the same as our shepherd's hut. So what else have we got in tonight? We've also got, I'm just trying to scroll through, we've got a lot of people saying hello. If I use singles for lighting circuits via a multi-gang switch, can I use one single CPC? So if using singles for lighting circuits via a multi-gang switch, can I use one single CPC? Not really sure what the question. So certainly yes, we can wire in singles if we've got the right containment. But yeah, perhaps need a little bit more information on that with regards to, can I use one single CPC? Any thoughts? Does that ring any bells with yourself, Lee?
Yeah, I'm thinking of conduit installation initially, where you might have a number of line conductors dropping down a conduit, and to save on space, one CPC is being dropped down. That's one scenario I'm thinking of. Yeah, I think we need a little bit more clarity on that one.
I mean, you'd certainly need a separate protective conductor for each circuit, but yeah, depending upon how the lighting circuit's been wired. If it is a single circuit, but you've perhaps got drops or a spider arrangement from a single point, then you could still use the same CPC, so long as it goes to each and every point, each and every accessory. So yeah, a little bit more information, I think, on the question. What else have we got? The thermal damage issue is rubbish. If there's no fault on the network with diverted neutral, there won't be any thermal damage. I think bonding conductors should be selected based on TNC. I think the idea around judging for thermal damage is we're obviously saying 6mm in an existing TNCS is undersized compared to current regulations, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's unsafe. However, if due to a problem, for example, the worst case scenario being a lost neutral in the vicinity of the installation, then your bonding conductors could be carrying diverted neutral currents, which is why we're looking for thermal damage, because they're going to be very large or potentially very large currents, which would evidence themselves in small conductors. So yeah, I think that the thermal damage is an issue. I mean, again, we've got some good information in Best Practice Guide 4, which is recognised as industry standard. So yeah, I would certainly return the caller to that we would be looking for thermal damage. If there's no signs of thermal damage, then we can say that installation currently isn't experiencing those harsh issues. So yeah, we are looking for signs of thermal damage where we've got bonding conductors which are undersized in comparison to current regulations. And so a follow-on question: if replacing an existing consumer unit and the bonding conductors are 6mm, should the bonding be upgraded? Well, if we're, again, it does depend on whether we're in TNCS or TNS or TT land. If we take it that the question's based around TNCS, then it would be a recommendation to upgrade the bonding to current regulations, but providing they are at least 6mm, then it would only be a recommendation, not a requirement. So I think that's fair to say. Would you agree with that, Lee?
Yeah, totally, Sam, totally. And it's something we can assess at the outset of the job as well, before we actually start changing the consumer unit. Usually at the point of quotation, we could go out, we could investigate the earthing system and see exactly what the work entails. Yeah,
and so that's one of that's one of those things that certainly we get so many calls to the helpline, and it's I've just changed a board and now I've found XYZ. Unless it's a distress change that you're doing in an emergency as fast as possible to get supply back on for a particular reason, then if it's not a distress change, then you've got to take the time to do that survey up front to see. Yeah, absolutely, because otherwise the classic example is you're changing the board and you're going to install RCDs. The previous board didn't have RCDs. You could be inheriting problems that are going to result in that more sensitive protective device tripping, and now you're in a position where now you've got to find where the fault is before you can walk away completely, because you can't leave it. You can't leave that RCD tripping. You can't take the RCD out because your new board needs to comply with current regs. So the circuits that require RCD protection will need it. Let's just have a look in here. What else have we got?
Worth highlighting that with the client as well, the quotation stage, when we're looking at changing the consumer unit, just explaining to them the level of protection that we're proposing we're going to install is massively enhanced to what they maybe already got, and therefore there could be issues within the installation which they're currently unaware of, and through changing the consumer unit and carrying out initial verification, as we spoke about earlier on, this could highlight a number of issues. So it's always best to discuss this at the outset before we actually start the job, just to set the benchmark, if you like, the possible issues that we could encounter.
Yeah, absolutely. Another common question that does come in, and in particular with the increasing popularity of wet rooms. So in a wet room with a demountable shower head, where is the limit of zone 1? So this is that question that often people ask is, do I have to take the demountable hose off its normal working point and stretch it to its furthest point and then measure my 1.2 meters? So what's our answer there, Lee?
Yeah, I mean, it's 1.2 meters from the fixture of the shower head, if you like. We need to consider anything outside zone 1 as well. So any apparatus that we're going to install in these areas has got to be fit for those areas. It's got to meet the IP ratings for those areas. So we're talking about 701, aren't we, Sam?
Yeah.
And there's nice diagrams in there which indicate, where we should be measuring from, and gives us an idea of where the zones start and where they finish.
Yeah, but I think this is one where, again, as an industry, we agree you don't need to stretch out that hose. You take your 1.2 meter measurement from its normal point of use, so that the point where the detachable shower head is fixed, so where it's normally mounted, and you'll get that. That's on the electrical safety first wiring regs advice and guidance questions. That's one of the frequently asked questions on there, and I think it's also mentioned in the IET's guidance note 7, which is about special locations, in the section on 701 bathrooms. It's almost mentioned there. So yeah, a lot of people get carried away and stretch the hose out to its maximum and then measure a further 1.2, and then you're basically covering the whole of the room. And it's not a requirement. It's deemed that if people are going to do that, then that's a conscious decision, and they've got to be aware of their actions. So yeah, we base our 1.2 measurement, and then, like you say, even outside of the zones, you still need to consider IP requirements, because although we might be outside of the special location requirements for section 701, we've still got to comply with general regs, and general regs tell us that everything we install has to be suitable for the environment, or the way that we install it, we make it suitable for that environment. So yeah, general regs and consideration of IP still need to be considered. Okay, let's have a look. What else have we got? If using a multi-core cable, for example 4-core for outside LED lighting to give 2 switch lines, neutral and earth, are people getting problems with lights glowing when off? I think this is something that we see quite often, especially with energy efficient lights, because we can get some induced voltages in those cables that are multi-core, so that they might be carrying permanent lives as well as switch lines. You can actually get some induced voltages, not normally excessive, so they're just enough to give a small glow even when we've got the lights off. There's not a lot we can do about it. However, you'll find that a lot of the manufacturers, the lighting manufacturers, will provide devices to put in on the last light. Snubbers, they're often called filters. They are of a form, and they can be installed in the last light of the circuit, and they can act as they'll actually drain that current away that's effectively generated by that small induced voltage. So if you do get that instance, I would suggest go back to the manufacturer of your lights to see if they do manufacture a filter or a snubber themselves. If not, then get a general one to see if that will cure your problem. But quite often that's the cause of it. It's an induced voltage, which isn't great in terms of energy, i.e. very low current and even much lower, very low voltage and even much lower current. But because we've got these very energy efficient lamps, it's enough to give a bit of a glow. Have you seen that on your travels, Lee?
Well enough, it was a topic of discussion on this morning's assessment.
Okay.
When a contractor had a small issue with this, and we suggested, there's a wide array of methods of sorting it out, if you like, going back to the manufacturers to see what they offer. But in essence, it's just like a resistor that filters away the induced voltage, if you like.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, the complaint on this particular site wasn't a faint glow, but periodically there was like a momentary flash of the lights all together, and it would be the build-up, it'd be like a capacitor sort of effect, build-up and then a discharge, if you like.
Yeah, and I think it's something that people have only really started to see since we've been using energy efficient lamps, because that they don't need an awful lot. That's what they've been designed for. So yeah, that sort of brought that to it. It was probably something that was always around, but we just didn't notice it before when we had the less efficient lamps.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so. Again, we've gone crazy with time, so we'll finish off with another common one. So certification issues. What's the difference between U and UO when completing an electrical installation certificate? So again, this is one of our top 10s on certification. So tell us a little bit about the difference between U and UO, Lee.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's something we see fairly often when we're reviewing contractor certification. UO is line voltage to earth, and U is voltage between line conductors. So if we've got a multi-phase system and we measure the voltage between line conductors, we should be recording U as 400. And if it's a single-phase installation, U would technically be not applicable. The only voltage present is 230 volt line conductor to earth.
Yeah, absolutely. So in our single phase installations, we should be recording UO as 230, and if we're using a certificate that asks for U as well, then that would be not applicable. If we are in our three-phase installations, then U would be 400, so voltages between line conductors in a standard three-phase. UO would still be 230, because even in a three-phase system, each voltage to earth between the lines is still only 230. So UO doesn't change, but U is not applicable. Okay, so once again we've rattled through time. Thanks very much for those of you that did populate in some questions, much appreciated, and we'll gather those up again, those ones that we didn't get to answer, to see if we can create some common questions out of those. There is no wire webinar this week. Next one is next Wednesday. That's Wednesday the 5th of May, and it's another one in our coding clinic series. So please, if you're interested, please go onto the website and sign up for that. Next Monday is Bank Holiday Monday, the 3rd of May, so there will be no Q&A next Monday night, but there'll be Monday Q&As will be back in a fortnight. That'll be the 10th of May. So hopefully see you then. And once again, thanks for all your questions that you've populated in the chat tonight. Did it go quick? I did tell you that would be the quickest half hour of your week.
It certainly did, Sam. Certainly did.
As they always say, it's amazing how time flies when you're enjoying yourself. So that's always good. Okay, well, that's good night, and thanks very much from me.
Okay, cheers, folks. Thank you very much.
Cheers, Lee. Take care, and hopefully we'll see you all again in a fortnight.